I never liked working at Wendy's. The pay was low. The hours were long and the customers were rude, but I needed the money, so I stuck with it. I thought things couldn't get any worse until I met the new employees. They were hired a few weeks ago, after some of the old staff quit or got fired. They were a strange bunch, always wearing hoodies and sunglasses, even indoors. They never talked to anyone, except among themselves. They always seemed to be whispering something, but I could never hear what. One night, I was closing the store with them. It was just me and them, no manager or supervisor. I was counting the cash register when I heard a loud thud from the back. I went to check it out and saw one of them dragging a large sack into the freezer. He looked at me with a cold stare and said, "Nothing to see here. Go back to your work." I was scared, but I didn't want to cause any trouble. I nodded and walked away. I wondered what was in the sack, but I didn't dare to ask. I finished my work and clocked out. I was about to leave when one of them stopped me at the door. He smiled and said, "Hey, do you want to join us for a bite? We have some extra food in the freezer." I felt a chill run down my spine. I declined politely and said I had to go home. He shrugged and said, "Suit yourself, but you don't know what you're missing." He opened the door for me and I ran out as fast as I could. I got in my car and drove away, never looking back. The next day, I quit my job at Wendy's. I never went back there again. I don't know what they were doing in the freezer, but I have a feeling it was something horrible. And sometimes, when I pass by a Wendy's, I swear I can hear them whispering, "Fresh, never frozen." I always loved Wendy's. The burgers were juicy, the fries were crispy, and the Frosties were creamy. I used to go there every week until I found out the truth. It happened one night when I was hungry and bored. I decided to go to Wendy's for a latte night snack. I drove to the nearest one, which was open 24/7. I parked my car and walked in. The place was empty, except for a few employees. They looked at me with a mix of surprise and fear. They seemed nervous and jittery, as if they were hiding something. I ignored them and went to the counter. I ordered a Baconator, a large fries, and a chocolate Frosty. The cashier took my order and gave me a receipt. He said it would take a few minutes and asked me to wait at the table. I nodded and walked to the table. I sat down and looked around. The place was dimly lit and dirty. The walls were stained with grease and blood. The floor was littered with trash and bones. The air was filled with a foul smell of rotting meat. I felt sick, but I tried to calm myself down. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was seeing things that weren't there. I told myself it was just a normal Wendy's, nothing more. But then, I heard a scream from the kitchen. It was a loud and piercing scream, full of pain and terror. It sounded like someone was being tortured or killed. It made my blood run cold. I jumped from my seat and ran to the kitchen. I pushed the door open and saw a horrifying sight. There was a man on the floor, covered in blood. He had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and stomach. His eyes were wide open and his mouth was agape. He was still alive, but barely. Above him, there were two employees, holding knives and forks. They were wearing aprons and gloves, stained with blood. They had masks on their faces, but I could see their eyes. They were cold and cruel, like those of predators. They looked at me and smiled wickedly. They said, "Welcome to Wendy's, where we serve you fresh, never frozen." They lunged at me, ready to make me their next meal. I screamed and ran for my life. I don't know how I escaped, but I did. I never went back to Wendy's again. I don't know what they were doing there, but I have a feeling it was something evil. Working the closing shift at a 24-hour fast food place meant I saw my share of weirdos. But nothing prepared me for the night that guy walked in. It was a rainy Thursday, around 2 a.m. The lobby was empty, except for my coworker Jamie mopping the floor. I was wiping down tables, anxious for our shift to end so I could go home and crash. That's when he stumbled in, drenched from the downpour outside. He was a tall, lumbering man with greasy hair plastered to his forehead. His clothes were stained and ill-fitting. The guy looked seriously strung out. I tensed up as he shuffled to the counter, leaving a trail of water behind him. But Jamie cheerfully greeted him and took his order. Just a small chili and soda. Relieved it was a quick order, I watched Jamie hand him his food. That's when things got strange. The man grabbed the chili container and promptly dumped the entire thing over his head. Chili globs dripped down his face as he let out a satisfied moan, like a kid playing in mud. Jamie and I exchanged stunned looks. "Ooh. Sir, is everything all right?" Jamie asked gently. The man ignored him, continuing to massage the chili into his hair and clothes. I went to get the manager from the office while Jamie tried to convince the weirdo he couldn't just dump food on himself in the restaurant. But the guy got agitated and started muttering angrily under his breath when we asked him to leave. Suddenly, he shouted, "She left me no choice." Then he pulled a freaking handgun from his jacket and thrust it in my face. "Lock the doors and empty the register. Now." Jamie and I had no choice but to obey in stunned silence. This was not how I imagined my shift ending. The guy forced us to turn off the lights and disable the security cameras too. It was just the three of us alone now, in the dark lobby. He made me empty the safe in the office while he held Jamie at gunpoint. With him distracted, I slipped my cell phone from my pocket and tried dialing 911. But there was no signal thanks to the storm. We were trapped. After stuffing the cash in his pockets, the robber ordered us to the floor on our knees like dogs. Waving the gun wildly, he started ranting about some woman who betrayed him. He threatened to shoot us as revenge for how she hurt him. Just then, lights flooded the parking lot outside. A police cruiser pulled up, likely noticing the weird, darkened interior. Before the cop could even exit their vehicle, the psycho fired a shot through the lobby window, shattering the glass. The officer took cover behind their door and radioed for backup. The robber cursed and dragged us to the kitchen, declaring he would make his final stand here. Jamie and I huddled on the greasy floor, certain these were our final moments on Earth. But miraculously, the cops were able to talk down the lunatic and convince him to let his hostages go. After what seemed like hours, he finally threw his weapon out and surrendered. They found over a dozen more loaded guns and ammo stashed in his jacket. As the guy was led away in handcuffs, raving like the deranged psychopath he clearly was, all I could do was sit there shaking with Jamie. We quit on the spot and never returned to that Wendy's again. I still have nightmares about that chili, soaked madman, and his arsenal of weapons. He belonged in an asylum, not a fast food restaurant. But that's the thing about working late-night customer service. You never know what kind of wacko is going to come through those doors after dark. Monsters hide in plain sight, lurking anywhere, and they can turn your routine shift into a fight for survival in seconds. I never would have taken the late shift if I knew what was coming. Maybe I'd still have a job, and I wouldn't have that image burned into my brain. It started as a slow Thursday night around 1 a.m. My coworker Dan was flipping through his phone at the counter while I mopped up a spilled Frosty near the door. Barely any customers ever came in during these graveyard hours. Our Wendy's was in a sleepy rural town after all. I was half zoned out when the entrance chime jangled. A man staggered and dripping wet from the storm outside. He was on the scrawny side with disheveled hair plastered to his forehead. Gross sores and scabs covered his wiry arms. My first thought was meth head. We'd had some tweakers come in now and then trying to steal food, but he didn't seem violent or agitated. Just ambled up to the counter, smiling awkwardly and fidgeting with the zipper on his jacket. Dan took his order, a small chili and soda. I watched him hand over the cup of chili and fill the drink at the machine. So far, so normal. Until the dude suddenly upended the chili over his own head, dumping it straight onto his hat and face. I froze, mop handle in hand. Chili globs rolled down the guy's grinning face as he made happy groaning sounds, like a toddler playing with his food. Dan shot me a bewildered look. "Oh, sir, you can't do that here," he said. The man paid no attention, massaging the lukewarm chili into his hair and clothes. I went to get the manager from her office and back while Dan tried to convince the weirdo he had to leave. But when I returned with our manager, Jenny, the situation had escalated. The man was now shouting and making violent lurching motions while Dan attempted to keep him away from the tables. "She made me do this," he bellowed, bits of chili spraying from his lips. Jenny hurried behind the counter to call the cops while I hovered near the door, ready to block him if he tried to rush the exit. That's when he pulled it from his jacket, a huge butcher knife caked in chili and what looked like dried blood. Dan threw his hands up, stumbling backward. The man made crazed, jabbing motions with the blade, apparently at imaginary attackers only he could see. "Stay back," he warned. "I'll cut you too, just like the others." Jenny dropped the phone mid-call, holding her hands up submissively like Dan. No way could we tackle this nut job. We had to wait it out and hope cops arrived fast. But he only grew more agitated, ranting about her, making him slay people, and how she was coming for us next. He cornered Dan against the beverage station, wielding the nasty blade inches from his face. "Better ask her to spare you," the man growled. "Only she decides." He grabbed a fistful of Dan's hair, pressing the knife edge to his throat. Dan whimpered, eyes bulging in terror. Just then, blue and red lights flashed outside. Thank God, the cops. 2 officers burst through the entrance, guns aimed at the psycho's head. "Drop the weapon, hands in the air," one ordered. The guy hesitated only a second before sprinting for the back exit. The cops gave chase while more police arrived. An ambulance showed up too since Jenny was having an anxiety attack. But the worst part came later, when they found the backpack stashed in our bathroom, and the human remains inside. I overheard one of the cops saying the guy had supposedly murdered his grandmother and was off his meds. He'd been on the run before making a pit stop at our Wendy's to commune with the voices. We were lucky he hadn't killed anyone else tonight. After that, I couldn't step foot in that restaurant again. The spot where he held the knife to Dan's throat is forever burned into my mind. And so is the image of that deranged, chili-soaked face. Still gives me nightmares. Goes to show, monsters can walk right through those fast food doors. And punching a time clock makes you no safer once the sun goes down.